today. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Yeah, Tom is a YouTuber. His link is in the description if you don't know him, but I'm pretty sure that most of my audience already knows you. So, but for those who might not, will you tell me what your YouTube channel is about?
I sell bathtubs.
Oh, how fun.
It's a phenomenal job. It gives me lots of views. Occasionally getting some debates, but mostly bathtubs.
So, what prompted you to start your channel?
By accident. So I was inviting out professors to coffee, um, both as a way to like test my philosophy knowledge and to try to overcome my social anxiety. And I would record my conversations on my phone and upload them to my YouTube channel for convenience, and people just started watching. So mostly just random luck.
Very cool. And so, did you study philosophy in college?
Sort of. I mean, I audited classes. I think I have like 12 credits, 12 college credits, but I didn't ever get a degree. I didn't ever want a degree. Just started my own business out of high school pretty much with my YouTube thing and went from there. So I kind of studied philosophy. Mostly I went for like computer science or something.
Okay, cool. So I just wasn't sure what I should title this talk because I didn't know where you wanted to go with this, but I just put "What's up with Tom Jump and God." So what's up with you and God?
Huh. I lost my faith in when I was 17-ish in high school. I was brought up Christian, went to a Catholic grade school in high school, had major depression my entire life, and I was praying for help every day, morning and night, and never got help. So I just stopped being able to believe. Didn't identify as an atheist till I don't know, 4 or 5 years later, maybe 10 years later, when I started to research into philosophy and learned more about the new atheist movement and the philosophical positions. And that's when I started to realize, oh, atheism really fits. It's a good position, I think, academically, evidentially. And so that's when I became an atheist from following new atheists and the philosophers. Guess that's a short version.
Yeah, did you eventually get over the depression?
Uh, Temporarily, sort of for the most part. So, like in the past year, I did because I got to date a model, Instagram model, and that was the one thing that really helped me to overcome my depression. For me, I have high function autism, and people with autism have a special interest, and my special interest is dating models, apparently. And that's like the only thing in the world to someone with autism that really matters. The most important thing to them is their special interest. And for mine, it's dating really attractive women. And since I got that, it essentially instantly cured my depression because I was like suicidally depressed until about a little over a year ago. And being in a relationship really helped me to overcome that. And I got dumped like 4 months ago. So I was steadily declining, but overall I'm still a lot better than I was before the relationship.
Cool. And but is that relationship still going? Because you were kind of talking about it in the past tense.
No, I got dumped 4 months ago.
Oh, okay. I see. Okay. And so you mentioned like you never got that answer to prayer. And so would you say like is that the primary driver for like why you don't believe in God, or have you like come to like do you have other reasons that are more primary?
Before I started researching philosophy, that was the primary reason because I was a Christian for the first half of my life. And because I believed in this all powerful, all loving being who cared about everyone and was the creator of the universe and who could do anything, I was wholeheartedly believed that it really loved me and cared about me more than anything in the world, or cared about everyone more than imaginable or whatever. And praying to that being for help with something as simple as depression and not getting it made me unable to believe that such a being existed. So it'd be like praying to a milk carton, pray long enough, nothing happens, eventually just realize it's just a milk carton. And so that was the primary reason. And then years later, after getting into the philosophy, just the evidence was just so bad. I stopped being able to take the position as seriously because I was still very, I think, hopeful maybe in the back of my mind that there was something out there that cared about me enough to do something or to help. But once I got into philosophy, that kind of went away.
So what caused that to go away? What ideas in philosophy?
I think morality was a big one, and the other arguments, analyzing how the other arguments didn't work. So like morality being, when you really research morality and what morality is, there's very clear examples of better models of morality than Christian or religious moralities. So going through the Bible and being like, oh, that was pretty bad, and there's not really a justification for it because certain philosophical arguments you can make to show that there's no possible way for there not to be a way to accomplish whatever goal God had without doing sacrificing Jatebeth daughters or whatever, or killing the 40 kids with the bears. That one's a good one. It's like 2 Kings 20 something. It seems like there are better ways to run the world that are easily imaginable and easily logically possible. So if you think of impossible world semantics in philosophy, here's a possible world without drowning babies. That isn't the current world we live in. Therefore, whatever world God must have chosen that includes drowning babies is clearly less moral than that one. And you just do basic logic trees of the moral possibilities, and it shows that the Bible ones are not very good by comparison.
Okay, but like, where are you getting the idea about what is moral?
Well, you can use an internal critique like in the Bible. You just say heaven. Use heaven as a possible world as a way to compare different possibilities and say that would be a way to assess what is moral. But I like my own model better, so I think that my model is more moral. But either way, you can simply posit different ways the world could be given the Christian paradigm, and this one is not even close to the most moral.
So what is your model?
My model is the best of all possible worlds model. It states that any involuntary position of will is immoral, and therefore the morally perfect world is one where it is impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing. The way to accomplish that would be essentially to give everyone their own universe, kind of like they have their own house. An all-powerful being could do this without much difficulty. And you essentially get to design the rules of what occurs in your universe. So you just have a list of all possible actions, murder, torture, drowning babies, eating chocolate chip cookies, whatever. And you can put them all on a list of allowed or not allowed. And in your universe, that is the laws of physics, essentially. And if you want, you can enter somebody else's universe or ask to enter somebody else's universe, and they can allow you in, just like they can allow you into your home. But you have to consent to abide by the rules of their universe. And so all interactions are then voluntary. No, it's impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing. And I think that is the morally perfect model.
Okay. Wow. This is the first time I've heard that one. That's cool. Kind of a unique position. So, yeah, I don't know. And when you say you can use the Bible to as an internal critique for God's morality, can you talk more about that?
Sure. So you can try to determine what the values are. So like heaven is essentially, is heaven morally perfect? Most Christians would say yes. So because you can't really critique the Bible, you have to critique Christians because the Bible's interpreted by people. And so if you, as an atheist, for example, interpret what you think the moral doctrines are in the Bible, it doesn't usually work very well as an internal critique because every Christian says you're wrong. But so if you ask the Christian, is heaven morally perfect? And they usually say yes. Is there free will in heaven? You get some very conflicting answers there, but you essentially just ask the Christian what they believe on a number of select topics, and then you can, from that, establish what they interpret the moral core values to be, and then you can build a world based off of that. Imagine what heaven would look like to them, and show how it's easily possible God could have created that without creating bugs that eat out the eyes of babies.
So do you feel like you have more answers about the world now than you did when you were a Christian?
More answers. Depends what you mean. I mean, in some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Like, I think I'm more happy to admit I don't know on topics before I would always be able to make up an answer. God did it because, which I don't think qualifies as an answer anymore. But there are, now that I'm more well acquainted with philosophy and science, I do have more literal answers to questions that we do have answers to. And I think that I've a better grasp of like physics answers, like the fine tuning argument, cosmological argument, what caused, what is a better explanation of the origin of the universe and the fine tuning of the universe. I think we do have better answers to those questions. So partially yes and partially no.
Okay. There's a question. There's a couple questions here in the chat. One of them is related to what you were saying about your morality model. So, for TJump, what justifies the requirement for consent and voluntarism?
I use the scientific method, so essentially follow the evidence wherever it leads. And so when analyzing morality, what we do is we look at the moral intuition and moral progress, the moral dilemmas, philosophical problems in morality, and try to map out the evidence on a graph essentially and plot it out and draw a line to connect the points to see where it leads, try to describe a principle that describes the points, and then try to infer from that principle what could ground it. And so instead of trying to start top down and then start with a thing that we think could ground it, we go the evidence route and follow the evidence and try to infer things from the evidence first.
All right. So this is kind of going to be a discussion. Do you have any questions for me?
Sure. What inspired you to start your channel?
Well, I've always been an evangelist. So a few years back, it just seemed like a good opportunity to be able to share the things that were on my heart with a broader audience. So I just started making some short videos, and then my channel kind of morphed into what it is today. So it's taken a little bit of a strange turn. I was not expecting when I started that my primary audience would be atheists, but it's an interesting surprise.
And how did that turn happen? Is it Doug's fault? Just blame Doug. 100% Doug's fault.
No, but well, okay, at the beginning when I started my channel, nobody was watching it. So I put ads on my videos for a time, like, where I paid for it to be advertised. And like it was just going out to anybody. And I was getting tons of comments from atheists who weren't really watching my videos. They were just taking the opportunity to just be like, Christians, but I started responding to them. And then I ended up getting like in long conversations with them on the chat. Sometimes the conversations would go on for months. And so my channel somehow, like, I don't know, it was attracting a lot of atheists that were continuing to comment and sometimes watch my videos. And eventually I ran into Digital Gnosis Nathan, on like I guess I ended up seeing his testimony video. So I thought he was a Christian. And I wrote to him and I said, "Oh, I really liked your testimony video." And he said, oh, well, that's nice, but I'm not a Christian anymore. I'm an atheist, or I'm an agnostic now. And so I asked him if he wanted to come on my channel for an interview. And that was the first interview I had ever done. But I would say it started, and then once I talked to him, then I talked to another atheist on my channel. And then that's kind of how it shifted. I started getting contacted by more atheists saying, hey, can I come on your channel and tell my story? And so I was just kind of like rolling with it. You know, if somebody wanted to come on, I'd let them come on. And I started getting complaints from the Christians on my channel because at that, you know, my primary audience at that point was just a small group of Christians, not a large audience, you know, but, you know, they were complaining, why are you letting these atheists talk so much? You shouldn't be doing this, you know, and eventually most of the Christians left my channel. So, you know, and for me, that was fine because I really never was attempting to reach out to Christians. I was really more doing this for those who either have never heard the good news about Jesus or who are currently lost.
Cool. And that's interesting because I mostly interview Christians, and as an atheist, and you're a Christian, you mostly interviews atheists. What have you learned from interviewing atheists?
Well, I guess I would say I've become a lot more compassionate toward them because before I really started talking to atheists, I just kind of thought of them as just evil people mostly. I mean, so I guess I've kind
Ouch, I'm hurt. Oh my God, I'm going to cry.
So not only evil, but also ridiculous. Like I you know, just felt like atheism was like the most irrational position, and like nobody rational could be an atheist. And I guess
Also
now
true.
What's that?
Also true.
Really? You think it's irrational?
No, it was just a joke. But
so anyway, I think I've grown in compassion because I think there's a lot of people who sincerely would like to believe in God, but they have reasons that make it difficult. And I've also, you know, talked to a lot of people who've been very thoughtful about this. So I no longer think of it as completely irrational. It's still, in a way, incomprehensible to me, but simply because I've always been aware of God's existence. And so it's really hard for me to like make that jump into somebody's shoes who can't see what I see. But, you know, I no longer think of it in quite the same way that I did before I started talking to atheists regularly.
And why do you think you said it's incomprehensible because you see God in the world? What do you mean by that? Why is it incomprehensible to understand the atheist position that people don't see God?
Well, like I said, I have come to understand it more now, but still, to me, when I look around at the world, I think general revelation is powerful, even without the Bible. Just being able to see the created things, the sky, the trees, look at the trees, guys. Just
I'm gonna clip that.
the
Just clip that
beauty.
one.
Yeah. So just the created things, and even just human beings, animals, that kind of thing. It's just always been clear to me that there is a creator.
But why do you think those things convince you or increase your confidence that there is a creator?
Well, because I never observed these type of things spontaneously appearing or assembling themselves. And so I think it's kind of a violation of our observations to think that that could occur. But of course, you know, these ideas, the way that I'm expressing it kind of includes like my education on evolution and that kind of thing, and being, encountering the ideas about evolution. But I would say even before I ever heard the naturalistic explanation for our origin, that I understood as a young child that, there's a source for life.
That makes sense. That's a good starting point for a hypothesis. Like we don't understand or we don't see this happening naturally or randomly. Um, but going from that, how do you get to the conclusion that God did it? And why do you think the method that we use from the scientific conclusion is not as compelling?
Well, there are limits to what science can discover, right? And really the question about the origin of the universe, or the origin of matter, or the origin of life, is not answerable by science. So we just, I mean, how do I get to that conclusion? Well, like I said, I came to this conclusion long before I ever heard anything about things like the Big Bang and things like that. So it's difficult to state how I came to that conclusion. I can just best say it was just always an awareness.
Do you think that having that awareness is like a good basis of evidence? Because from my perspective, if we have a question we don't know an answer to, the best explanation is going to be the one that says whatever my hypothesis is, whatever I think the answer is going to be. If this is true, here's some predictions we can expect to see, do some experiments, and then see if you get the predictions right. Then if you do, that's a good explanation. But just saying, like, I imagine people in Norway hundreds of years ago, 1,500 years ago, had the starting intuition that like Zeus or Thor did it. It was a part of their culture. But just having a starting intuition that some higher power did these things doesn't seem to be like a good way to actually determine what actually caused them. Whereas I think the methodology of science from the atheist perspective is a very good way to do that. So for example, you said science can't discover the origin of life. I don't think I would agree with that at all. But it seems like if we have two hypotheses, one that was designed by a designer, one that was created by natural processes, and we want to say, well, which one's the better hypothesis? We look at life, very complex. We think cells may take like 10,000 steps to go from just basic building blocks of organisms to actual life. And we want to know, well, how did it get there? Well, science makes predictions. It explains probably, I don't know, maybe 10% of the steps, but not in order. We just pick any of the one steps. Like, how did the shell of the cell form? Well, we know shells. If this is done by a natural process, we would expect to see a natural process where these shells of cells form, and then we discovered it on clay. Like, the shells, the corpuscles form on clay. And so we've step 300 and 300,275 explained by naturalism. But if we look at the intelligent design side, I don't see any of the steps making any testable predictions that we would say, if the hypothesis is true, here's what we'd expect to see, and then do an experiment and see it. I don't see any steps being explained. So from my perspective, because there's a lot of testable predictions that have been explained on the scientific side, and none of them have been explained from the design side. And all most people have is like this intuition that there's something more. And I had that too, so I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's a perfectly fine way to build a hypothesis. But because that hypothesis doesn't go that extra step to make testable predictions, it seems like the science side is more reasonable from my perspective.
Yeah, I can see that. And you said a lot, so I'll try to respond to everything. I think the first thing that you asked is, if there's something we don't know the answer to, then how should we go about finding? And, you talked about looking at predictions and evidence and that kind of thing. But, what I'm saying is that it was never a matter of I don't know. So I agree with you. If we don't know something, then there's a variety of ways, not just scientific, that we can go about learning things. So there is science, there's other ways that we can learn as well, with our experience. We can learn with, you know, basically, maybe reading bodies of literature. There's lots of ways that we can learn for things that we don't know. But for me, this was never a question of something I don't know. Then you mentioned people in Norway, and maybe believing in Zeus and Thor. And I would say they weren't wrong in their intuition. Now, they may not have had a perfect understanding of who the creator is, but they weren't wrong to assume a creator from what they've seen. And then you disagreed with me on abiogenesis and a naturalistic, and that we don't have a naturalistic explanation. But if we just take our scientific observations up until this point, can we say that life arises from non-living things?
Yes.
Okay. And where do we get that idea? What scientific observation have we made that shows that life can arise from non-living things?
All the predictions I mentioned like one of them, the corpuscles forming on clay. The fact that, for me, any hypothesis that makes predictions and gets those predictions correct is evidence of whatever the hypothesis is. So if I had a hypothesis that magical pixie leprechauns created life or something like that, and I made a prediction, if magical pixie leprechauns created life, we would expect to see corpuscles forming on clay. And we looked and we found corpuscles forming on clay. That would be evidence of magical pixie leprechauns. And so if evolution is a hypothesis that's it formed by natural processes, and if it formed by natural processes, we're going to find specific natural processes in these locations under these circumstances, and then we find them. That's evidence of natural processes creating life. And so for me, whatever your hypothesis is, if it can make successful predictions about the future and tell us things about the world we don't know yet, that's evidence of the hypothesis. And that's what we see in science. We see lots of these predictions that it gets correctly all the time. And there's no other hypothesis that makes any successful predictions. And so the most rational conclusion is that the origin of life is a natural process, because that hypothesis makes lots of successful predictions.
Okay, so then are you saying that our scientific body of knowledge, that this would be a true scientific statement that life comes from non-living things?
Yes, that is the consensus among all scientists, all scientific fields.
Well, I'm going to strongly disagree with that, because I don't think that it's a scientific statement to say that life arises from non-living things. So, as far as I understand, we've never observed life arising from non-living things. Now, we can make predictions, like you say, but if we cannot repeat this in a lab, if we can't show it, if we cannot if we cannot test this, then it's not part of our scientific body of knowledge, right?
Oh, no, I'm not. It's like we don't need to directly repeat everything. It's not a part of science. You just need to repeat an experiment, and the experiment needs to have an expected result from. So you don't I don't need to repeat, for example, an earthquake to scientifically test if there was an earthquake. I don't need to repeat a volcanic explosion or a volcanic eruption to know that Pompeii was covered in lava. I can just say, if Pompeii was covered in lava, when things are covered in lava, we expect to see lots of ash. We look at Pompeii, oh, look, there's lots of ash. So this is probably a volcanic eruption. I don't need to directly repeat the volcanic eruption. What I need to do is say, I have a hypothesis that explains the data. And if this hypothesis is true, here's the things we would expect to see. And if we see those things, that's evidence of the hypothesis. So you don't need to directly repeat the origin of life. You don't need to directly observe or repeat the Big Bang. You don't need to directly observe fossils having children. All you need is a hypothesis that says, if this is the case, we would expect to see this other stuff that we haven't seen yet. And if he gets it right, that's really good evidence, really, really good evidence that it's true. So kind of like prophecy in the Bible. If the Bible gets prophecies correct, that is evidence of Christianity. And you don't need to show that a direct connection between the prophecies and God, for example. So Doug uses the one example of, if you pray to God with a wet napkin and start it on fire, that's evidence of God. That would be. It would, if you could pray to God, Christian God, and every time you did, a wet napkin would start on fire, that would be evidence of God. Now, obviously, you can't make a direct connection between God's hand starting the wet napkin on fire, but that doesn't matter. You don't need to directly repeat the God's hand part. All you need to do is say, I have a hypothesis. Here's an expected result. If my hypothesis is true, do an experiment, and if you get the result. So there seems to be, like, why don't you accept simply the ability to make successful predictions about the future to be evidence of a hypothesis without directly observing or repeating the core of the hypothesis itself?
Yeah, well, I think what's going to happen here, and we could end up descending into a debate about abiogenesis, but the problem with doing that is that our understanding of the facts is so fundamentally different. So, like, your understanding of the facts is that we've shown things, we've predicted things, and we've shown how, like, these different steps could have occurred, right?
Sure.
Okay. And my understanding of the facts is that we are unable to show how the steps toward life, the steps from non-living things to life could have happened. So because our fundamental understanding of the facts is so different, we would really need to go and, like, be presented with the facts themselves and kind of work that out before we could have a real discussion about it.
I do want to follow up on that. I do have a super chat from Udaf. He says, what are her thoughts on Christian nationalism, J5 plus, etc.? I don't know what J5 plus is. J5 plus 1.
Yeah, I don't know what J5 plus is. Christian nationalism, I think that's horribly destructive. I really think nationalism is destructive. I don't agree with it. I mean, I'm thankful to be an American because of some of the privileges that it affords me. And, but at the same time, I don't, like, think of myself. I don't think that, like, loving America or Americans is more than other groups of people is beneficial for the world.
A bunch of people just messaged in J5 plus 1 is January 6th, but apparently YouTube doesn't let people put in January 6th.
Okay.
I was confused.
I will say January 6th is incredibly frightening, actually. And I really try to avoid talking about politics on my channel, but the entire Trump presidency was shocking for me that people could elect him. It was absolutely frightening, one of the most terrifying times that I've personally lived through. So I'm just thankful that the world is still here, actually. But we survived.
A good thing to be thankful for. I mean, also kind of ironic because a lot of Christians want the rapture, so it's kind of an ironic thing to be thankful for. But
yeah, well, I don't even know if I don't know if I believe in the rapture.
That's interesting. What do you mean you don't believe in the rapture?
I mean, it's one idea about, the way that things could end up, but I feel like there's very little scriptural support for it. And it requires interpreting, you know, it requires an entire system of interpreting revelation that is problematic. And like, I feel like at one time in my journey of faith, I felt like I understood revelation. And then I'd read another book from another perspective. And then I think, oh wow, now I understand it totally different. Right now, I can tell you this. I know almost nothing about that book, and I don't really mess with it. So I'm not very in
Revelations or the
timesy.
Bible? Just Revelations? Okay.
Revelation. Yeah. So I really don't get into interpreting that. I'm not very in timesy. And yeah, so that's it.
You mentioned that you saw my debate with PhD Tony and Sal. In that debate,
Yep.
PhD Tony asked, "Do you believe in magic?" How would you answer that question?
Oh, most definitely I believe in magic. Yeah. All kinds of magic.
So, like,
Why is that an important question?
it's always because I've asked several, like lots of Christians this question, and they always say no. They say magic is like an abomination. It is a figment. It's like it's a false analogy to compare miracles or God to magic in some way. And so when you like use that in the atheist community, you say like it's a comparison between a miracle and Jesus rising from the dead and magic happening. And Christians, a lot of them seem to take offense to that. But then PhD Tony asked this really good question, like, do you believe in magic? Because it's in the Bible, it says magic is real and gives a few examples. And I thought it was a really great question. So it's always, it's a new thing I learned that's it's not always seen as an insult by Christians to compare it to magic. So it's a new thing I've learned recently.
You know, I kind of find there's sort of an anti-supernaturalism that comes with Western Christianity sometimes that to me is very odd, because the Bible is full of these, well, I don't know if you want to call them supernatural events, but they're events that, you know, are basically things that we wouldn't expect if we were just, you know, if the natural laws were in effect. Although one could say, well, God is using natural laws. It's just his law, you know, his power supersedes the normal course of things. So I don't know how people want to define supernatural, but I mean, the Bible is full of fantastic stories that, you know, require something more than what is natural. So I don't really see why Christians would read the Bible and not believe in magic, powers, and the power of God at work today. Like, you know, sometimes I feel like we read Jesus's miracles from the past and we say, oh, that's great, and focus on that. But then Jesus is real. He's here now and he still does miracles. But for a lot, in a lot of Christian environments that I've been in, that's like a really scary concept and they don't want to mess with it. Like, it's kind of like weird to expect Jesus to do a miracle. So it's, I don't know. What was it like in your Christian upbringing? Like, did the Christians you were around believe in miracles and expect them?
Yeah, my parents were definitely big into that, and they said that God had a direct impact on their lives and answered prayers all the time. So that was definitely a bigger part of the Christians in my life, and probably one of the bigger reasons why it was so hard for me to believe that God wouldn't answer mine. So I think that, yeah, it was definitely a big part of it.
Yeah. Well, I understand that. You know, uh I mean, if it makes you feel any better, there's been lots of my prayers that God hasn't answered. I have probably more unanswered prayers than answered ones. So, you know, I don't think it's unexpected I mean, I don't think it's like abnormal for God to not answer in the way that we hope.
I mean, I have a different perspective on that, but for me, it seems like if God forces a child to suffer major depression or any horrible, horrific lifestyle for 20 so years, I think that's pretty good reason to not trust him.
Mm,
Uh,
yeah,
got a
that's understandable.
question from Marty Mad Scientist. Science continuously improves knowledge of the physical world. How does religion improve knowledge of God?
Wait, can you repeat that? Sorry.
Science continuously improves, gives us improving knowledge of the physical world. How does religion improve knowledge of God or give us more knowledge of spiritual stuff?
Well, religion can lead us to knowledge of God, or it can lead us away from knowledge of God. And so I would say it depends on what the religion is teaching. And even within Christianity, there are some very bad ideas that I think lead people away from the knowledge of God. So I would not say religion leads people to the knowledge of God. I'd say the Holy Spirit leads people to the knowledge of God, and religion at its best can help assist people.
I think it's more asking about progress and knowledge. So, like, there's scientific progress. We go from knowing some set of facts to gaining more set of facts that we know over time. And it seems the analogy is about it doesn't seem like it's possible to gain a more set of facts about religious knowledge or God knowledge.
Well, I guess it depends what you consider progress in that area. And so I think we have progressed in ideas in that, like, okay, we've got a history of theologians that thought deeply about things like the incarnation and the Trinity, and and so they have probably refined ideas about God to a degree. But I would say the progress that's important to make is love for each other, growing in love for God and love for people. So, how has religion progressed that? Well, unfortunately, I would say it has kind of a checkered history. In some cases, religion has caused people to live out in love for God and neighbor, and in other cases, it hasn't. So, it's kind of like up in the air.
Cool. Sounds like a good answer. I did want to go back to the steps of abiogenesis. So, even if we don't have all of the steps for life, we can see some things like we don't know, for example, how a part of the cell formed. And then we can see, oh, look, that same part is being formed over here on its own without any kind of intervention of a mind. Um, that seems to give a possible explanation to how this could have been done without a mind. So if we see here's one part of the cell, here's it being made in the world on its own, because you mentioned like we never see these things being made on their own in the world randomly. So, but if we do, we say, oh, here's the corpuscle part of the cell being made on its own naturally in the world. Um, that's seems to be a prediction that would be made by naturalism, but not by design. So even if we don't know all of the steps of how life was made, and we can see that this model has made successful predictions, why would we need more than that? Why would, even if it's just like one, as I say, it makes one successful prediction, isn't that more than a model like the God model? And wouldn't that make it more reasonable to accept the model that's made at least one prediction?
No, because it's kind of like you don't just need one step to happen and then you've got plenty of time for other steps to occur. You know what I'm saying? Like the kind of thing that is going on in the simplest life forms, you need many steps to happen all at once. And if you don't have those, the life form doesn't exist at all. So you don't just need one step, you need a series of steps. You need a series of steps that are all happening in concert. And so when we're talking about like the probabilities of things happening, like it just gets astronomical when you start thinking about all the chemical bonds that would have had to occur and like all of the steps that would have had to happen in concert. So um do you see where I'm going with that?
Sort of, yeah. So there's like a bunch of steps that we need to occur simultaneously, and so there's a big problem of how did all of these steps happen
Yeah.
at the same time to produce life, and then so we have a unknown. Here's this: how did these steps happen? And we have two hypotheses. One is God did it. One is natural processes. And for me, it seems like the only thing that counts as evidence that makes one of these more plausible than the other is which one can predict things about the future. So the naturalist hypothesis says, well, if it was done naturally, we would expect to see this step happening over here. And even if that's just one of the 10,000 steps that needs to happen, that's a future prediction. And if it gets it right, that's one piece of evidence. Now, on the God side, I don't see any pieces of evidence. I just see essentially it's really complicated, it's hard to explain, therefore God did it. But I don't see any point saying a prediction or an explanation about future data or telling us something about the world we don't know yet. It just seems to be like it's really complicated. I can't understand how naturalism could do it, therefore God. Whereas naturalism is saying, if naturalism did it, here's some future knowledge about the world that we can gain from this hypothesis. Here's a prediction. Here's an experiment we can do. We can confirm these things. And it seems like that kind of answer is a better kind of an answer because it tells us about the future. It gives us insight into future data that we didn't know yet. Whereas the God hypothesis is just saying, we don't know, therefore God.
Well, I don't know if it's we don't know, therefore God. It's that, and it's what we do know that tells us, therefore God. Or, I mean, you could substitute, therefore aliens, or therefore, whatever other explanation there could be of a mind behind this. But it's from what we do know. So Sal told this little anecdote, and I'm probably going to get the details wrong, and that's really sad, but I can give the gist of the story because I think it's a good illustration. There was like a professor that was teaching a room full of kids, and he basically sent one of the kids out of the room, and he took a bunch of coins, and he put all the coins on one side, like on heads. Okay. And then he invited the kid back in the room, and he was like, hey, did these coins, I just poured them out of the bag and just let them fall wherever, then, and the kid was like, no, you messed, like, basically the kid knew that because they were all, facing one direction, that was not the product of just random chance of just pouring the coins out on the table. He recognized that, there was something more going on there, that the professor had tinkered with the coins. And so I think that's what we can know when we look at the properties of life and we try to envision what life would have looked like, if what it would have taken for life to arise by natural processes. It's what we do know that tells us that it had to be the product of a mind.
So if I showed you a very clear pattern, like let's say we use the exact same pattern of the coins all in heads in a line or whatever, and the student said, oh, it must be designed. But then I open a door and I show him just an open room of billions and billions of patterns of coins that have all been thrown. Don't you think at that point he would be reasonable to say, oh, actually, that's probably just one of the billions of different coins. You just picked one of them that looked really cool and showed it to me, and I was confused because it looks like a pattern. But really, it was just random chance because there's literally a billion coins over there that have all been in random patterns, and you could just pick any pattern you want, and it's going to look designed if it's like something that's interesting to me.
Yeah. So I mean, and that's where we would have to get into the numbers, which I'm not prepared to do, of how many like different coin arrangements would it take to get that type of assortment and to be able to locate it. And so to me, it's just kind of a thing of, okay, like Tom, if you're willing to believe that, I mean, okay, but it just seems like it's sort of a ridiculous position to take.
Right. That would just be
Seems like there's a simpler explanation.
I don't think it would be simpler, but suppose we say that, so we see these coins all on a line, and your hypothesis it's made by a mind. My hypothesis it's a natural process. And if it's a natural process, well, then we would be able to open a door somewhere and just see billions of coins. There'd be billions and billions of coins everywhere. And then we look and we find certain areas that have these billions of coins. Well, now that's starting to indicate probably not design, probably something else. And then if we say, well, if it's natural processes, well, these two coins, like of the 10,000 coins that are in a line, these two are actually really linked, closely linked. And so in a lot of the patterns, we're going to find these two coins exactly connected in the way that they are in this current organism. And then we look and we find all the patterns. Oh, look, these two coins, they're connected. They're connected a lot. They really like each other because they're physically have a bond that holds them together in such a way that links them. And we find out, oh, these other coins over here, they're slightly far away. They're not connected to these other two coins, but these coins are also connected in a way. And we look at the billions of coins and say, oh, look, they're also connected. They're connected too. Now, this is starting to seem really strange that this hypothesis that they're done by natural processes is making these predictions that there's these patterns that we see in this big long chain, and that we can find them in this lots of other patterns everywhere else in the universe of the billions of coins. And so it seems like there's progress being made in this one hypothesis, whereas the other one is just saying God did it, and then kind of a stop, kind of not really any progress, no real inference to anything else in the future. So it seems like one of them is making progress and one of them isn't. And for each of these different patterns that we find, the probability goes from it gets lower. Probability gets lower. So if you find two coins that are very often linked together, that means the probability of this long string of 10,000 coins goes from 10,000 to 10,000 or to 9,998, one in 9,998, because the two are linked together. We find these other four coins that are bound together. Well, then it drastically decreases. So it goes 4 times less. And so for each pattern we find in nature, the probability goes from some astronomical number to a slightly smaller astronomical number. And as we continue to find more and more and more patterns, the number continues to go down. And so of the two hypotheses, the naturalistic one, every single day or week or month or whatever, we're making progress in science and the number continues to go down. It's been trending down for the past 100 years or so in the field of genetics, whereas the God number has made no progress at all. And so it seems to me that of the pattern, the field making the progress is the one that's the naturalistic one. And so that seems to be a really good reason to think the naturalistic one is the right one, because it's making progress. And the way progress in science goes, it's fairly continuous in every direction.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you see science as the only way or the best way to obtain knowledge?
Of the external world, yeah. Like, I think that anything that can differentiate imagination from reality counts as evidence. And the best way to do that for the external world is novel testable prediction, so science. I don't know of any other method. If you could tell me one, that would be great. I know that we can do conceptual things like 1 + 1 = 2. We don't need science for that. So there's conceptual methodologies that can differentiate imagination from reality. But when applied to reality, like differentiating, is this just a part of my imagination, or does it describe something in the world, a correspondence to reality? I don't know of anything else other than novel testable predictions that works. Do you?
Well, I mean, yeah, like I think there's lots of ways to obtain knowledge that does not rely on, science. I mean, if if you love someone, you don't find that out scientifically, right? That's, something that is derived from a knowledge that is derived from something else, your experience, your emotions.
Well, but that's
like
conceptual. So like, I grant that conceptual things can be known just by thinking about it. So your feelings, your direct experience, qualia, numbers, logic, all those things, that's conceptual knowledge. But my question was more, is there a way to learn about external things outside of your imagination in the world other than novel testable predictions?
Well, yeah, because you have your sensory perceptions, right? I wouldn't call that science. I mean,
Well, that's
you could define that as science. Is that what you want to do? Like if you touch something, you see how it feels. Would you consider that science?
what does empirical mean?
Um, I really wouldn't know how to define it. I guess something that is maybe able to be discerned not by opinion or belief, but by some kind of,
Sense experience?
I don't know. Let's look it up. Define it for me.
Typically, it's observed or experienced rather than through pure logic or reason. So, yeah, you were pretty close there, but empiricism, empirical research, it's usually things observed through sense experience. So, those are typically the foundation of the empirical method is sense experience. That's what makes it important.
Okay. So are you saying that our sensory experiences then are part of the, like, it's
Science.
part of what you're calling science? Okay.
Yes, empirical research, empirical data, science. It's like the thing that science does. It's called empiricism normally. From the religious people call it empiricism normally. Is empiricism, are you an empiricist? Or all you accept is empirical data? It's normally what they use instead of, also along with scientism and those kinds of things, just means empirical.
Mm-hmm. So is that how you would is that what you would call yourself, an empiricist?
No, empiricism is a technical term that refers to the Venetian circle and a specific set of philosophers, and so it's a much more technical thing. It's not used correctly when Christians call someone an empiricist. So, no. But the sentiment that the Christians are using, that do I prioritize sense experience and empirical data? Yes, absolutely. I don't know of anything else that gives us any information about the external world.
Okay. Well, is there what else would you like to talk about?
Super chat from Grays174. Why does God do anything? He doesn't need to. He's fine either way, and thus whole setup is incredibly whack and ad hoc seeming.
Yeah, I guess I would just say for the fun of it, for the beauty of it, for the glory of it, and for love.
Yeah, I wouldn't see any problem with he wants to. So he wants to do it for some reason. That seems perfectly rational. But I think there's like a complicated philosophical argument. If God is perfect, why would he do anything? Kind of a thing. Like, so if God is absolute perfection prior to the creation of the universe, what benefit is there to creating the universe?
Yeah, and that's where I think I've heard this argument before, and it kind of makes me feel like we need a definition of what perfect is in that sense. Like, and I might not agree with the philosopher's view of God as perfect in that way. So, I mean, I think God is morally perfect, but I don't know if I would take on the definition that's given like in classical theism.
That's fair. Another super chat from Efont. What are your thoughts on the logical problem of evil?
Oh, well, I'd say it's a good argument. And so I do think that it can be overcome, but I do think you can say God has morally sufficient reasons for allowing the things that take place in this world. But it's definitely, to me, the argument against God that has the most punch. And it's the one that I have experienced personally and wrestled with the most. So, but for me, it's never been a question of does God exist? And I'm looking at the problem of evil. It's more like God exists. Is he good? And so that's something I wrestled with for quite a long time. Is God good? Because the Bible says that he has compassion on all that he's made. He satisfies the desires of every living thing. And I read those words and I'm like, is that really true? I mean, he didn't satisfy Tom's desire to be free of depression. So
Hot blondes. That was my desire.
what's that?
Hot blonde
Hot
models.
blondes.
That's my desire.
Well, I can answer that one, but you know, can I really believe that God's intentions toward us are good when I look at the world and it seems like a place that is largely untouched by God's goodness? And so that is something I've wrestled with a lot in the past. It's something I continue to wrestle with. I still, you know, when I see tragic things happening, really have a hard time with it. But I've like made a personal choice to trust God no matter what I see and trust in his goodness.
It's interesting.
What do you think of the what?
That's really interesting. I definitely am interested to ask about that. What do I think of the logical? So the logical problem of evil is usually contrasted to the evidential problem of evil. The logical problem of evil says it's impossible God is good because of examples of evil. The evidential problem says it's probably God is not good because of problems of evil. So it's like the logical problem of evil is much stronger, saying that there's no way God could possibly be good, no possible justification. Whereas the evidential one says there's some small, minute % chance that he's good. We just don't know why, or something like that. So my take is definitely on the logical side. I prefer the logical version because I think that it's demonstrably provable that there is a more moral option. So I think that, for example, if God just created exactly this world as it is and just added one provision, everyone gets to choose if they want to be here or they're their own personal world, then that would be a morally superior world to this one. He did not do that, or if he did, it contradicts what the Bible says, so it would be a different God. But that would prove that God can't be morally perfect because there's at least one moral option that he didn't choose.
Now, I feel like it assumes, though, that we have as much knowledge about what is like the best possible world, right? Like, what if God is working with, and I do think he is, a completely like a more like a fuller picture of reality, and your picture of reality doesn't allow you to see what he can see.
Well, he could say that. He could say, so here's a world designed for my fuller picture of reality, the one I designed, and you can choose to go there, or you can choose to go to your own for an indeterminate amount of time. And eventually, if you want to, you can go to this one and go back to the one I designed. If you want to go through the trials that I've set up for you to go through some personal development, blah, blah, blah. And so he can give you the option to, whenever you're done playing in your own sandbox, to come to his world. And or you can just be like, nah, I'm good. I'm good with my video games and hot blondes. And just adding that one provisional option of you can choose to enter this world instead of forcing people to do it without their consent would make it a more moral option. So the fact that he forced people to live in this world without consent, without their giving consent to be here, is an immoral action in and of itself.
Well, now you said that the idea of God giving consent contradicts the Bible. What about it contradicts the Bible?
Oh, it just contradicts like literally what is said in the Bible. So we suffer from sin because Adam and Eve ate the apple. So that's what we are. I forget what the term is. We are stuck here in the world of pain and suffering because they made this choice. Like we didn't each get to choose. We didn't each get to choose to go to our own universe and voluntarily be here. He hardened Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh didn't choose to be able to voluntarily disagree or go to his own universe. So if for the world I'm describing to be true, it would have to contradict the interpretations of the Bible that are classically used. It would be a very strange interpretation of the Bible. Prior to any of this, God gave you the choice and you chose to be here. That would have to be added in somewhere.
Okay, because I mean, and by the way, I don't like believe in the idea that God gave us consent, but I'm just trying, when I think about what the Bible actually says, I think it might be agnostic on that topic, because you could still be affected by Adam and Eve's sin, but still have consented to enter the world in that state.
Yeah, but I think there's certain parts that are specifically contradictory, like when he says that um, the hardening Pharaoh's heart is a good example. So if he literally says he's going to stop Pharaoh from being able to choose, that's a direct contradiction there. And there are other examples I've come up with, but I haven't had that conversation in a while, so I don't remember them off the top of my head.
Right. But how does God interfering with Pharaoh's will while he was here on earth determine what happened before Pharaoh entered the world?
It's just like one example. I don't remember what the other ones were off the top of my head, because I have gone through that where it specifically says like um, how it determines what human souls do and where they go. It doesn't include the option of choose to opt out and go to your own universe anywhere in there. It's pretty explicitly not said, and said against in many cases, but I don't remember them anymore because I haven't debated that topic in like 5 years.
Okay.
Do you have some more
All
super
right.
chats? Grays 174 asks, how upset would you be if Calvinism were true?
Well, God can be whoever he wants to be. So if the Calvinist God is true, okay. But I think Calvinism is problematic and results in a view of God that I don't think is accurate. And so I think Calvinism makes God a bit of a monster. And so I really don't think that that's the correct view of God.
And P. Bot Thulu asks, deity is morally perfect. Deity drowns babies. B-E-H, babies. Question mark. Those seem like a contradiction.
You know, it's amazing to me how often this particular event in the Bible gets brought up, this the flood event. You know, I've read the flood story for years. I never read into it any moral problem with God's actions there, and I still don't. So it's very interesting to me that people have focused in on God's actions in the flood event. Now, God has killed a lot of people, right? I mean, look, you know, you can look almost anywhere in the Bible. You don't have to go to the flood. You can go to a lot of different places in the Bible, and God is killing people. And, you know, the way that I see that is he is God and he has the right to decide who lives and who doesn't. And if he kills you, then he has a good reason to kill you. And maybe it's for love for others that he has decided to kill a certain set of people. So I know that really is going to scare a lot of people, because, you know, that's like kind of saying, well, oh, then how do you know all you Christians aren't going to turn and like, slaughter a bunch of people? And I hope Christians don't do that, because I don't think that that is something that God would command in this age of grace. But, God has the right to kill. What do you think about that?
I think if there is even a logical possibility of doing something less bad, and if he doesn't do that, then he's immoral. So like, it's kind of like, I like to use a doctor analogy. If there's a doctor in the 1800s and you've been shot in the leg, the doctor's going to cut your leg off because that's all he can do to prevent sepsis and infection, and you're going to die if he doesn't do it, and that's the best chance you got. If a doctor today with modern technology cuts your leg off, you're going to sue him for malpractice because he can just give you an antibacterial shot and save your life, and he doesn't need to cut your leg off. So he's causing you undue, unnecessary harm, given the technological capabilities of the doctor. So if God has the ability to do even one thing slightly better and doesn't, he's immoral. So this is where poof or drown comes in. I'm sure Doug has probably asked you this. If instead of drowning all of these babies, because I assume you grant that we're probably babies on the earth at that time period,
I'm fine with assuming that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there were babies on the earth, and God decides to cover them in water and suffocate them to death in one of the top 10 most painful ways to die. The top 10 casual,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot more painful ways, but casual ways to die. As opposed to poofing them or just teleporting them to heaven, like S.J. Thomason said. That was a good one, changing their location. This seems like it's very easy to understand there are logically possible ways to make this less immoral. And so the fact that there is a more moral possibility there indicates that God must be evil, because he's kind of like the doctor in the 1800 or a modern day doctor who cuts your leg off when he could have just given you an antibacterial shot.
Well, I think there's a lot of assumptions about what occurred in the flood that we don't have the details of in the flood story. Now, it would be different if it said specifically, and all these babies were writhing in agony and just gasping for their last breaths, and they were crying and wailing. But we actually don't have anything like that in the flood story. So we're assuming a lot of things, including that there were babies. Now, I'm willing to grant that there were babies, okay? But that is, something that is not mentioned. So we're assuming that, there were babies, and that's pretty natural to assume. But you're also assuming that those babies suffered. You don't know what God did in that moment. Maybe he did knock them all unconscious before they drowned. Maybe he so touched them with his presence that they didn't even experience the suffering. And we have testimonies of martyrs who experienced that, who, even though they were enduring torments, it seemed like nothing to them because of the presence of God. And they were smiling, went to their death smiling. So I think there's, even a biblical precedent for God, making death less painful for people. And so, I mean, I don't necessarily assume that the babies suffered, but I mean, I certainly would rather, poof a baby than drown a baby if I had to get rid of it. So,
clipping that part too. Just going to add that up to the Pine Creek clip list. So that brought me back to your other statement earlier, where you said that no matter what God does, you're going to trust in him, that he's moral and perfect.
Yeah.
And to me, that seems problematic. To me, that seems the opposite of what we should be doing. So, for example, I could say the same thing if I was, for example, SS Nazi soldier or whatever. I could say, I'm going to trust in Hitler, and I believe he's doing what he's doing because he really loves us and he's trying to protect us from the heinous Jews and their evil Jewishness.
Right.
And so all the gassing all of the babies he's doing that in love, and he gave them tranquilizers before. There's nothing in Auschwitz says they didn't give them tranquilizers before, so maybe they just knocked them out before so they didn't suffer. But you can always say that, but is that really the rational interpretation of what's going on? Or probably not.
Well, my decision to trust in God didn't come from like inexperience or lack of knowledge. It came from my experience with him, from the testimony of who he is in scripture. So my trust has a basis beyond just blindly following a leader. So
what's the difference there? So like, to me, when I hear that,
well,
I hear the
what
same
I mean
thing
is like, okay, if I was going to, God forbid, trust Hitler, what would cause me to trust Hitler? And
presumably it would be like reading some book he's written and that you find really inspirational, or like the Red Book in China, or Mein Kampf or something. I don't know, Mein Kampf is very inspirational, or just any book that you find really intellectually respectable. Because
right,
that's assuming that's probably the only personal visions or something. So to try
and
to
I
make an
guess
analogy,
he was pretty influential because a lot of people did trust him. So I've never read Mein Kampf, but maybe people chose to trust in him based on that.
Propaganda, that's the word.
I guess we're all trusting in something or someone, right? So we're all doing that in some manner. So I've chosen to trust God. I think I have good reasons to trust God. Um, you know, I don't see a better option. Do you?
Yeah.
What's the better option?
Question and test and follow the evidence wherever it leads. So, like, if I see a story of a being or a super powerful dictator who had infinite food resources, but instead of giving the food and feeding all of his people, he decides to kill a lot of them. He's going to Thanos them. He's going to Thanos them out of existence. It seems like the rational interpretation there is he's bad. He's not a good leader, probably a bad leader. He had all these resources, could have given every person their own home, their own car, their own food, stopped all kinds of murder and rape and torture. But nope, he just decides to Thanos them out of existence, which technically less bad than the drowning, because Thanos literally did poof them out of existence. I think we need to clip that for Pine Creek. Just give him a little clip of Thanosing so we can add that to his repertoire. But he's still terrible. Even Thanosing them out of existence is still a horribly immoral thing to do. Ending someone's consciousness without their consent is immoral. And given that he had all of the resources to provide them happy lives, even if he doesn't think they're moral, which I don't care what he thinks, the fact that he didn't do that makes him by definition immoral. And so it's clearly the rational interpretation here is that's the wrong decision. That is the opposite of the good.
Well, see, now, okay, this is kind of going to take us in a little bit of a different direction, but you keep talking about what's immoral, and you're saying it's immoral to end someone's life. How do I know that?
Well, I'd say I'd follow the evidence the same way I do in science. So looking at moral intuition, moral progress, the philosophical dilemmas, and if there's one more, I always keep forgetting what it is. But if we look at the evidence of moral realism or moral progress or any field of ethics, we can plot out what morality would generally tend to be. And so we have evidence to indicate what the truth of morality is, and it definitely doesn't correspond to anything in the Bible, just like the truth of geology doesn't. And so I'd say that the same way that scientific facts contradict that there was a global flood, moral facts contradict the morality of the Bible.
Okay, where's my morality shark? Lance! Where do we get the idea about moral truth? Like, who gets to decide what moral truth is or what moral facts are?
Reality gets to decide. So I'd say we, like anything in science, we look at the evidence of what is in reality and try to follow the patterns of reality. So if you see a pattern, you try to plot out the pattern, describe a principle that defines the pattern, and then from the principle infer the ground of the pattern. And that's true of everything. It's just we use the best way to establish what is true is to make predictions, follow the patterns in reality. So it seems like if morality is real, what best describes morality? Well, morality is our feelings of right and wrong. When we see someone punch an old lady, we feel that's immoral. So we can plot out what are our moral intuitions. This is what we tend to feel as immoral. How does it change over time? Does it change from the past to the future? It does change. It's moral progress. Are there moral dilemmas, moral principles we can use to describe these patterns? Yes, philosophers have been doing that for a long time. And find out there's some very interesting trolley problems that we can establish to try to build what we think the moral principle is. And so we can try to establish moral principles in the same way we establish epistemic principles of philosophy. And so if someone says P and not P, that's usually a bad epistemic principle. It's a contradiction. And so we can build moral theories in the same way we build epistemic or scientific models. And given that, we can try to build possible worlds and assess which ones are the most moral options. So we can assess morality the same way we do anything in philosophy.
Shark attack! I thought he would smell blood in the water and come around. This is my friend Lance. He's a moral anti-realist. He's a philosopher. But now if 80% of people, Tom, believed that chopping people up and eating them for breakfast was morally right, would that make it right?
No. So what people believe is irrelevant. It's kind of like if sight, intuition, moral intuitions is like vision. If every 80% of people are going to see the mirage, if you're in the Sahara Desert and there's a significant amount of heat rising, it's going to create the illusion of a mirage in the distance. 80% of people, 100% of the people are pretty much going to see it unless you're blind. Um, that doesn't mean the mirage is there. What matters is the novel testable predictions. We can say, if it's a mirage, we can make some predictions that if we go over there, nothing's going to be there. We test it out. If it's real, we would go over there and see, oh, look, there's water. There's an oasis. And so we can make predictions about the patterns that we're going to see and interact with in the future. And that's where we get the evidence of if it's real or not. So in the case of morality, we can make predictions about how morality is going to shift in the future. So it seems like morality in human nature changes all the time. Women's rights, LGBT rights, Indian slavery, animal rights, veganism, all kinds of things. It seems like as humanity progresses, we become more and more moral, and we diverge more and more from the morality of the Bible. So as time continues to progress, it seems like we're going to see any kind of involuntary imposition on people's wills as immoral, and we're going to be able to prevent that ourselves. So like we're going to give people personal force fields if we could do so that they can't get shot or stabbed ever by anyone without their consent. And the fact that God didn't do that, but we are going to do that, is indicating that our morality is superior to that of the Bible.
But what if I simply disagree? Now, I'm going to assume I'm just assuming your worldview for a minute. There's no God. So, what if I just simply disagree with you that that's the way we're going to progress? What if I happen to enjoy chopping people up and eating them, and I'm starting a movement? And what if I get 99% of people on board with me? Then would you call that moral progress?
No, I would say that
Why?
there's a particular pattern that we see in human nature, and we can plot it out, and that pattern seems to continue. And so if it went in the opposite direction, I would call that regress, because it's not the same direction that we've been seeing over the past 10,000 years.
But how do you know which direction it should go in?
Which direction it should go in. So I think it's actually like a law of physics, or something we're literally going to discover in the future. It's like it's the thing where we literally measure in the future.
So, like, killing people is against morality just in the same way that the laws of physics work?
Yes, I think morality is a law of physics kind of a thing. I'm a moral naturalist, so I think morality is a natural phenomenon, natural thing in the world.
Okay, but who gets to decide? That's the thing. You keep saying patterns, but like, I mean, I'm just not seeing where these patterns are originating.
Well, so again, I think morality is a law of physics that affects people. And so we see patterns in the way that it affects people, but no one gets to decide. It's like literally a thing that exists in the universe independent of opinion. It's like literally like gravity. It's literally a law that's there somewhere independent of humans' opinions.
Okay.
And so
Well,
if morality is a thing that actually exists and it's out there, then no one gets to decide. It's like no one gets to decide what gravity is. It's a thing that exists.
okay. Wow, there's tons of questions from the morality shark here. So I'm just going to put the latest one, Lance, because I can't put up all these questions. Why think that the best explanation for patterns of moral judgment involves an appeal to stance-independent moral facts?
Because I make future testable predictions that I believe will come true. So I believe that we're going to discover that once AI is developed, or we discover aliens, we'll discover the same patterns. And so if it was just a product of evolution, we would never see these patterns in AIs, because they're not evolutionary unless we imparted them, like deliberately imparted them. But if my hypothesis is if we just make AIs and let them develop on their own, they'll develop morality on their own. And so if that was the case, then this would prove it wasn't an evolutionary pattern. And evolution is right now the best contender to explain morality. All the evidence indicates it's just a product of evolution. There's nothing more than that. But if my predictions come true, then that would be a better explanation because it predicts something evolution doesn't predict. And that would be why I would prefer mine, because I think this is going to happen.
Okay. Maybe I'll set up a debate with you guys because Lance has a lot to say on this topic. We haven't seen these patterns. He's presenting a hypothesis. He's not providing evidence for the hypothesis.
That's correct.
Sounds
My evidence
like-
has not been discovered yet, because if it had, I'd have a Nobel Prize. So I'm presenting a hypothesis and making testable predictions based off that hypothesis, which should hopefully be confirmed in the future, but haven't been confirmed yet. Because if they had, I'd be a Nobel Prize and be a millionaire.
But can you give me an example of how that could possibly be confirmed in some way?
What do you mean? The prediction that AI develop morality?
I mean, where would we know what morality is? That's the thing, is like you're kind of assuming that there's this thing called morality. Now, you've mentioned that that includes not killing. I don't know what else it includes, but I mean, I have no reason to accept that as a moral fact. Like, I have no reason to accept that killing is not a moral fact. I mean, is a moral fact if I'm killing people is against, morality, if I'm assuming your worldview.
Well, you sense it. So like you have moral intuitions that killing is wrong, right? So it's like if you look in the distance and you see, oh, that looks like an ocean. Well, you now have a reason to believe there's an ocean there. It might just be a mirage. It's possible it's just a mirage and there's nothing there, but there could actually also be an ocean there. And so since you have this sense that there is something there, that's a reason to believe that it's there. It's true that something's there. It might not be, but that's a reason to believe it's true. I think that it's going to be like either a higher order emergent property of some kind, or literally just a physical law like gravity, and we'll be able to measure it and just discover it like any other law in a lab. Just zoom in with a Large Hadron Collider and like, oh, there's the moral law. It's there.
Okay. Well, we could go on that topic, but I mean, we can save that for another time. What else do you want to talk about?
I got another super chat from Marty Mad Scientist. We are too far up the food chain to be a sustainable food source. We could maybe sustain 10% of the baby as a food supplement.
Wow, that's gross. Okay. All right. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I guess it's literally true that, yeah, I don't think we could use humans as a food source. I don't think we could generate enough babies. It'd be tough. So I think it's literally true. Accurate statement, factually correct.
Yeah, let me put this comment up, and I'll respond to this. Mitish Patel says, religion is for people who don't have the intuition that killing people is wrong. You can't stop them from killing. A book can sometimes. Sometimes the book makes them kill. Now, there's, I do have an intuition that killing is wrong. But if I adopted the worldview of many of the people watching, then I would try to fight that intuition, because I would wonder where that intuition might stem from, and if it's really the best, if it's really beneficial to have that intuition. So I think you're right. You guys should probably be very happy that I'm a Christian, because I would try to live as...
Just to clarify, it sounds like you're saying you would question it and you would doubt it, which is perfectly rational. So there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you wouldn't test it by literally trying to kill people. That'd be a stretch.
Let me go further than that and tell you why it is a good thing that I'm a Christian. Because if I believed that we evolved by natural processes, and that like this principle of survival of the fittest is true, then I would try to be the fittest and the strongest. And I wouldn't mind if in order to, advance my own power and strength, that I had to steal your stuff, kill you, do whatever I needed to do. So that, to me, that would be living consistently, because some people might say, well, but we all work together better if we just get along and be nice. But I mean, if I look at human history, that doesn't really bear out, right? Like the people who, seize power for themselves and kill a lot of people end up like living the high life, right? So, I mean, how would what would be the most beneficial thing to do if that worldview is correct? I think it might be to kill people and steal their stuff.
Well, if by beneficial you mean for yourself, I mean that this is
exactly.
literally the case, even if you're a Christian. So like Joel Osteen.
What's that?
Well, even if like the way the world is, no matter what the way the world is, the most beneficial thing, if you could be a dictator, would be to be a dictator. You would, even if Christianity is true, it'd still be beneficial to be a dictator. You still get all that stuff, and you could pray for forgiveness when you're done. But so.
Well, actually, no, because if Christianity is true, then it's best to be the servant of all, like the Lord is, and to love all people, and to enter into, what it means to be an image bearer of God, which is expressing love for God and others. And so,
so how is Buddha doing right now? Where is Buddha?
I have no idea. Maybe he got reincarnated. That's a joke.
Clipping that section out. That's a good clip.
No, I don't believe in reincarnation, guys. But I don't know where Buddha is. Where do you think Buddha is?
In the ground as worm food, I believe. But given the Christian doctrine, I think he's probably in hell. And given how many very moral individuals have devoted their life to being loving and caring based on the Christian doctrine, would probably be in hell. I think that also is a strong contradiction to the morality of the Bible.
What do you mean many people that have given their lives to being loving and caring would be in hell? First of all, I just want people to know I don't believe in eternal conscious torment. I don't believe in this fiery place of ongoing judgment called hell. I believe in destruction, annihilation. That's what the Bible talks about hundreds of times. Life versus death, not heaven versus hell. But speaking of that, why do you think that there are loving, kind people who would end up being judged and condemned by God?
Because they reject Jesus. They don't accept Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life, the light.
So you're getting, well, I'll just say that's my view, which is also a biblical view. I think you could make a case for what you're saying from the Bible, but it's not the best way to interpret the Bible. Jesus talks about the righteous versus the wicked quite a lot. And he, Jesus talks about the sheep and the goats, the parable of the sheep and the goats, when he gathers all nations to be judged. And he separates them as sheep from goats. And the sheep are surprised that they're being welcomed into his kingdom. And why are they being welcomed? Because it says, when you were hungry, Jesus said, when I was hungry, you fed me. And they were like, when did we do that for you, Lord? And he was like, whatever you've done to the least of these, you've also done it to me. So there's no act of kindness or act of love that God is forgetting. He knows people's hearts. And I think it's a very horrible, horrible way to think about God, to think that all he's looking for is a mental assent to who Jesus Christ is, and that he's meting out salvation on that basis.
Sure. I like the more universalist approach better, where it's just have to be good. I think it's more moral, but I don't think that's the typical. I don't think that's the way the apostles interpreted it.
Well, see, I do think that is, because, I think really Jesus Christ, in 1 Timothy, it says he's the savior of all people, especially those who believe. Okay, so Jesus Christ's salvation, Jesus died for the sins of all people, and all people have equal opportunity to be saved by him. In fact, I think his salvation, I'm not a universalist. I think the wicked will be destroyed. But that Jesus' salvation is so powerful that you actually do have to try pretty hard to escape it.
So if we could go back in time and talk to the apostles and they had a more like KJV interpretation, do you think that would lower your confidence in Christianity?
Well, that's assuming that they would. And I think there's plenty in scripture to show the opposite.
This is hypothetical. So hypothetically, we go
Yeah.
back and they believe in
Okay.
the KJV.
Hypothetically, no, because I think the apostles they got things wrong quite a lot. I mean, if you looked when Jesus, right, was, you know, James and John wanted to call down fire on, you know, people who were like, I don't know, not following Jesus. And Jesus was like, hey, like, you don't even know what spirit you're talking from right now. So, you know, the disciples were mistaken about things a lot. And so, I mean, I would say I wouldn't be surprised if they got it wrong. They were arguing. I mean, in the New Testament, we have records of their arguments, you know, with about the law and circumcision and different things like that. So,
got some more super chats. Indo asks,
sure.
She keeps asking who decides. It's a biased question. How does God decide? He must just make it up because he can't reason without antecedent positions.
You know, I think that's getting a little too much on the philosophical side for me. But I mean, I just think God is who he is. He is love. That's how the Bible describes him. And so it's not that he's making it up. It's that he is who he is.
I think that's sort of like if the objection to your objection is who decides what morality is, because that would be like subjective morality, right? If one person gets to decide, that's subjective. And so if God gets to decide, then that also makes it subjective, just like if I got to decide. So if I get to decide what morality is, it's subjective because it's just what I say or something like that. So the same thing would apply to God. If it's based off his opinion, or his will, his conscious decisions, then it seems equally as subjective as if I got to decide.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I'm halfway convinced of moral anti-realism right now, which would mean that there are
Damn
no
you, Lance Bush.
Yeah, Lance. I have to give credit to Lance and Danny. So, and maybe Leo even. But so, you know, I've been talking to a lot of these guys. Now, I'm not sure about this. I prefer to take a long time to make up my mind about things, but I've listened to them long enough to understand what they mean when they're saying that there are no stance independent moral facts. And so I might be on board with that and say, yes, God, there are no stance independent moral facts. God has a stance, and that's the stance you're going to be judged by, whether you like it or not. Whatever your stance is, that's fine. But there is a stance that matters more than any of the others, and that's God's stance. And so he's going to judge you by that stance.
So that'd be moral subjectivism? Like, so it's,
yeah. Well,
okay.
Moral anti-realism. Yeah.
Okay. I'll take that. I think that's good. That's a good answer. Sentinel Apologetics. We've debated a few times. He's a good guy. What is the difference between the Christians like those young earth creationists you debated yesterday? By the way, fantastic job, TJ. Thank you. And myself, who also hold to mainstream science. You also hold to mainstream science. I think that would be the difference. I think the main difference between young earth creationists and old earth creationists essentially is the fact that they agree with science. I think that is the primary difference. I wouldn't say that all like young earth creationists are stupid or evil or manipulative. I think there's probably a lot of regular, average, normal people that aren't like Kent Hovind or Ken Ham or something that are young earth creationists. So yeah, I think the only real difference between young earth creationists and people who hold to science is that they hold to science. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I am a young earth creationist, and Rob is just giving a little jab at me, and that's okay. Hi, Rob. I love you. You know, and Rob has some strong feelings about this, and I know many people do, and I understand that. You know, in some of the circles I run in, I'm a little bit of a black sheep because I believe in young earth creation, but you know, I'm okay with that. And I will fully acknowledge that my belief in young earth creation is a belief. So I'm not going to say that the scientific evidence that I'm swayed by the scientific evidence. I do think there is scientific evidence on both sides. And I would even be willing to say maybe right now it appears that the evidence is more heavily weighted in an old Earth. But I have theological reasons for believing in a young Earth. Now, if ever the science became overwhelmingly conclusive toward the old Earth, maybe I'd reinterpret my theology and my understanding of the text of the Bible. But for now, I hold to a young Earth as a belief. Now, I will separate that from my disbelief in evolution, which I do think is scientific. I think I have a scientific reason for not believing in evolution. So I kind of separate those beliefs where I would say, even if I wasn't a Christian, I wouldn't believe in evolution. But the young Earth is very much based on my faith. What do you think, Tom?
I think Rob is screaming, it is overwhelming. There's this overwhelming evidence that it's not a young Earth creationist. Therefore, you should be older creationist. I think that's what he would say. So that would probably emulate my position too. I think there's pretty overwhelming evidence that the world is old, and that evolution is very, very much true. I think that's pretty much proven as much as heliocentrism, pretty much, from my perspective.
Well, interesting. We'll have to agree to disagree on that one. But I do have another channel besides Bread of Life. It's Examining Evolution. So you're welcome to come on there and share the overwhelming evidence for evolution if you'd ever like to.
Sure. I just did a debate with Kent Hovind, right, where we discussed that briefly before he yelled at me for not knowing what he doesn't know what novel means. So.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, how did the debate go? What did you think about it?
Well, it was funny, but both of my last two debates with Kent were very funny, because my last debate prior to this one, we got stuck on this one point. He said cows can't come from non-cows, and I said non-Kents can't come from Kents, and that was what we debated. Can a non-Kent come from a Kent, and why do we have evidence of that? And he's like, oh, well, you can use DNA evidence. And I was like, okay, then I think we know who won that debate. And this one was just, he wanted to give testable predictions for creationism, and in science, what we care about is novel testable predictions. I can predict that I'm going to pick my nose in 5 seconds, but that's not evidence of anything. No one cares if that's true. So you have to predict something new about the world that we don't know yet. And he didn't understand the difference between a novel prediction and a status quo prediction. And I was trying to explain it to him for about an hour. I don't think it worked.
Okay. Well, what are your favorite types of debates to do? Because it seems like you do a lot of debating.
The ones that give me money and hot blondes, those are my favorite ones.
Is that how you met your Instagram model?
Sort of. She did like the fact that I was a YouTuber. That was probably one of the contributing factors to how we got into a relationship. So yeah, I think it was a big part of it. But yeah, I've never enjoyed speaking to people. Like I forced myself to do it to try to become more social, and I do it as a job, but I don't actually enjoy talking to people. It's never been a thing I enjoyed. Like for the first 20 something years of my life, I never spoke to my parents or my sister or any friends. I probably due to my autism, I just don't. Human interaction and conversation has never been a thing I get a lot of value from.
Interesting. So do you feel like that's changed now? Like,
no, not even a little bit. No. Now I'm just better at pretending. So
then what drives you to talk to people on YouTube? Like why pick this job?
Money and hot blondes. That is the motivation. Like I prefer doing this because I get to work like an hour or a few hours a day, as opposed to like 8 hours a day. So that's a significant advantage of working on YouTube. And I get to sit in a nice comfy chair and talk to people, occasionally yell at people. But it's a much preferable job to McDonald's, Starbucks, Toys R Us.
Speaking of yelling at people, I've noticed I feel like you've kind of changed a little bit since I first saw you, because I've known you for who you are for a long time. And most of the time when I saw you talking to people, you'd be like, shut up, you're stupid, shut up, shut up. Like, then sometimes you just leave the conversation if, they weren't conforming. So then probably the last, I don't know, 10 interactions I've seen you in, I don't know when the change happened, but do you feel like you shifted your approach?
It's actually the opposite. So if you go to my earliest videos, my earliest conversations, I was always trying to be extremely polite to people. So I think I'm up to 700 something videos. So I've been doing this for quite a while. But unfortunately on YouTube, the most popular videos are the dumpster fires, the screamy, yelly ones. Those are the ones that get most of the traction, most of the algorithm. So like my top 10 most viewed videos are Darth Dawkins, Batman, Matt Slick, Jay Dyer, all yelly, screamy ones. And so those are the ones that mostly get pushed out to other people. But the way I started, I never did that. I specifically was trying to not do that as a way to build social rapport and social skills. And I started to do that later. And so the people who've watched my channel since the beginning have noticed that I have changed and that I've become more freely able to yell at people than I used to. But I usually only yell at people if they're doing either interrupting me a lot or making me repeat myself a lot. Those are the two things that really irritate me the most. Everything else I don't really care about.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Do you have some more super chats? Roy Lewis asks, how do you reconcile that if you had been born in Kabul, you would be Muslim, or in Mumbai, you'd be Hindu?
Well, I would say that's probably true. So I wouldn't argue with that. But does that mean I would have less opportunity to know God or to have salvation? No, I don't think so.
So do you think people could have salvation if the country has never heard about Jesus or God? It's just by trying to be good?
Yeah, I do. So, but what I don't want people to hear me saying is that there's any way outside of Jesus, like to be saved. I believe Jesus is the reason that all people can be saved. So Jesus is no one comes to the Father except through Jesus. The question is, do they have to have knowledge of God's plan of salvation in order to be saved? And I think the answer to that is no. I think people can be saved without the knowledge of how they're being saved.
So we technically didn't actually need the Bible then. Like if no one recorded what happened to Jesus, still everything would be fine.
Yeah, I think if the event happened that Christ died for sins and was resurrected, we're still in the same situation if we had no Bible than if we had a Bible.
I'm imagining Monty Python. The true Messiah was Brian. He was the guy to the left of Jesus, and just nobody knew about him, and just we're all going to be saved because we're just good people. We all thought it was Jesus. It's like, nope, it was the other guy.
So, what? Like you smiled when I said that. Is it because of the Life of Brian reference, or what was?
Yeah, because if you don't need to know who the Messiah was, for example, you don't need to know who the Savior was. It could have just been any random guy who like tripped and fell and just broke his neck or something, and he died for your sins. And everyone here is worshiping Jesus, saying Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And we get to heaven, it's like, no, it was Bob. Bob was the way, the truth, and the light. But it's okay because as long as you're a good person, you're allowed into heaven. So literally, no one could know this. There be zero people who actually know the true Messiah. But we're all going to be saved. Just be surprised at the end because it was Bob.
Yeah, well, if we get there, that's a good thing. And Spartan theology says, what do people need to be saved? And my answer is they need a savior. And if you're asking savior from what? Well, sin, human sin, and from death. And, if anybody doubts that sin is real or that we have a problem with humanity, I just submit to you human history and human present as evidence for the case that humanity has a problem. We've never failed to kill and destroy and do horrible things for very long. And so we do need a savior from the corrupt state that we're in. And we have a savior. And so Jesus Christ He's enough for salvation. And, if you have the opportunity to know him and trust in him, then that's a great thing. Your life will change. If you never have that opportunity to, know the plan of salvation, doesn't mean you can't be saved.
Do you think if in the future we become less murdery, we don't murder anybody anymore just because of our own human desires, that would be good evidence against the fact that we needed a savior? It was really more just the fact of nature that made us do those things?
No, I think it would be evidence of the continuing work of the power of the Holy Spirit, which has been poured out on all flesh. So I think, Jesus talked about the way his kingdom would grow. He said it would be like yeast, this tiny amount of yeast working its way through a large amount of dough. And so the way that I see the kingdom of God is that it is spreading slowly throughout the world. And when I say the kingdom of God, I'm talking about not just a specific place, but the things of God's kingdom where, Jesus, where there's no more crying, there's no evil, there's no mourning, there's no pain. And like the things that bring life and health to people, those are the things that are spreading throughout the world, along with God's kingdom. Love for other people, that is spreading throughout the world. So I think that I agree, Tom, I was playing devil's advocate against, your view of morality, but I actually agree with you that humanity will more and more know what is right and cease to do things like kill each other and that kind of thing. So as the knowledge of God spreads throughout the world.
Are you a progressive Christian? Like, I think in the future we're going to be more open to LGBT, trans identities, those kind of things. I think that as long as it doesn't violate other people's consent, consenting adults can do whatever they want together, kind of a thing, and aren't sins. And if there are any examples of that you would disagree with, do you think that in the future, if we do accept those things more often, would that contradict your view? So like, I think that we are moving towards being more moral, and that would include being more accepting of LGBTQ, trans, whatever, all those things. And if that contradicts the Bible's view, does that mean that the Bible might have been wrong about morality in those contexts?
Great questions. I love this, and I'm going to try to respond to everything. Well, first of all, I have a video on my channel called Jesus Loves the LGBT plus community. And so, watch my video. I would say I am more liberal in that view than most evangelical Christians. I am an evangelical Christian, though. I don't consider myself a progressive Christian, although many Christians do label me as a progressive Christian. All the people who are speaking against progressive Christians would definitely put me in that camp because I don't believe in hell as eternal conscious torment. And I'm, very positive toward LGBTQ and all the other letters. And so, those are and my views on women. I'm an egalitarian, and a lot of evangelical Christians are complementarian. They believe that the man is the head of the household and that kind of thing. So they would probably put me in the progressive camp. But if you actually look at what the definition of an evangelical Christian is and the definition of a progressive Christian, I am an evangelical Christian. So and I'm also positive toward Muslims, which is also not really, typical. So, yeah. And then you asked, would it mean that the Bible was wrong on some of these issues? Well, I think God, he works with us. So, and this is clear, like God, he works with humanity where we're at. And like, even though some things are not always his ideal, like, slavery is not his ideal, but slavery was widespread in the ancient Near East, and he, didn't overturn that practice. He worked with humanity. Polygamy is not his ideal, but God doesn't really correct people in the Bible for having more than one wife. And I think that's just because it was just such a widespread practice. and it had some benefits. It wasn't God's ideal, but it had some benefits. So, in the same way, I feel like, there's, if God didn't bother people about polygamy, maybe gay marriage isn't such a big deal to him. And so I think God created male and female, and his intention for sexuality is one man and one woman. That's his ideal. But at the same time, like, maybe it's not such a big deal because, people, I do believe, are born with gay, being gay. So I think, God may not care about that issue.
Cool. Udolf had a super chat. Social Darwinism isn't a tenet of evolution. So like killing people for your own needs or survival of the fittest isn't something that's prescribed by evolution. So doing that wouldn't necessarily be consistent with following evolution or something, because evolution doesn't really care. Doesn't prescribe that.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. I'm just saying how I would kind of approach it if I believed that.
That's fair. Woody Woodpecker asks, can't you tell us about the time God spoke with her?
Wait, I'm sorry. I missed the middle of the question.
Can she tell us about the time God spoke with her?
Okay. God has spoken to me many times. So, I could talk about one particular time, but it's kind of something that happens on a regular basis. Now, God doesn't always speak to me exactly when I want him to speak to me, but he has a lot of different ways of speaking to me. So sometimes, I don't know.
Cool. That's all the ones I've got. Do you have any more super chats? Questions?
Awesome. Oh, I don't do super chats. I don't make money off YouTube, but
what? Like, okay, that is the most crazy thing I've heard you say just ever, all day.
Really?
Yes.
Well, you know
Even
what?
worse than the babies thing, worse than like trusting God under. Nope, that is it. That was the one.
Well, you're tempting me. You're tempting me because you're sitting at home and you're making money off YouTube, and man, that would be really nice. But when I started this channel, I just really wanted to keep my motives pure. Like, my motive is for people to know the Lord. And I'm afraid of mixing my motives. So I just want to keep it pure. I don't want to take people's money. I just, even I don't make money off ads or anything. I'm not monetized. And it kind of bummed me out when YouTube started putting ads on videos, even if they're not monetized. But anyway, what tell me about that, the craziness of it. Tempt me.
Oh, it's because my motives are all money and hot blonde. So it's like the 100% motive. That's my Jesus of YouTube. That's why I YouTube. So just an ironic joke. But yeah, I'm full time, so I make about 50,000 a year off YouTube, something like that.
What? Oh my goodness. Now, where is the bulk of that coming from? Is it ads? Is it super chats? Is it what's happening there?
Donations. So PayPal, Patreon, YouTube subscriptions. Ads is not as much. I have some merch sales, and I get paid to travel around, do speeches and things. Shout out to the Black Non-Believers cruise in November. I'm a speaker, so I get to they're paying for me to go on a cruise to Mexico for 7 days, and I get to talk like a few times or once or something.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. Hope to be as big as Destiny one day. I'm jealous of his massive YouTube following.
Cool. Are there any final thoughts you want to share with me? We've been going for 2 hours almost. So this has been really wonderful, by the way.
Yeah, it was great talking to you. Wonderful conversation. Really appreciate you having a conversation with me. Really enjoyable person to talk to. I think much less unpleasant than Kent Hovind, for sure. Just had a debate with him a few days ago. So, but yeah, really appreciate it. And I think that was a good time to wrap up for sure.
Okay, well, let me ask you one final question. Why do you think I should not believe in God?
I think that the evidence contradicts the vast majority of the Bible. I think that the moral intuitions we have vastly contradict the morality in the Bible. I think that there are better answers to pretty much every question. I think that saying we don't know about things like the origin of life is a better answer than positing that God did it. I think that from pretty much every epistemic and evidential route we have, it doesn't lead to the things that the Bible says.
Okay.
And I think we can make a better world ourselves than what the Bible describes. I think that's probably the biggest one.
What about the coming kingdom that the Bible describes?
Well, I think we're going to make the world I describe, the best of all possible worlds, where it's impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to. I think we're going to be able to make that once we have enough control over nature through artificial intelligence. Once we get AGIs, and they're going to start to increase our life expectancy, decrease our need for food, gain energy from the sun. We're going to essentially solve death and murder. They're all going to be gone, and we're going to be able to do that here on Earth and give each person their own planet if they want one. So we're going to be able to achieve a better than heaven reality here, given just the laws of physics. And so if we can do that and God couldn't, I think that's a problem for Christianity. And I think that as we get closer, more people are going to become more atheist. That seems to be the trend that we see. UK just broke over 50%. Australia is over like 40% atheists or non-religious. So as we gain better lives, people are going to stop being as religious.
Well, now, do you think providing all the things that you described is actually going to like give people bliss?
Yes.
Because there seems to me like there's so many like rich people who have like no bounds on what they can provide themselves, but they still, end up depressed or suicidal.
Yeah, biology is the cause of all of those things, and we're going to have pretty easy solutions to those eventually, pretty soon. So I think that fulfillment, bliss, happiness, those kinds of things are biological. That's why there's a spectrum of people who are severely depressed and people who are very relaxed and yogi-like and just happy with whatever they're doing. And once we have the ability to integrate with artificial intelligence and like put computer chips in our brains, we'll be able to control those pretty thoroughly. So depression will be just a switch. You're depressed, off. Depression off. Problem solved.
Cool. Well, Tom, thank you so much for the conversation. And for those, I doubt there's anyone, but if there's any of my audience who don't know Tom's channel, it's TJump, and the link is in the description. Please subscribe to him, and hope to have another conversation, Tom.
Absolutely. It was great coming on. I really appreciate the conversation. It was pleasant talking to you, and I'll talk to you later.
Yep. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.